and I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out. Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. Tonight we're joined by national security expert and former CIA targeting analyst, Sarah Superbad Adams. Sarah, I love this Superbad. You're gonna have to tell us about that. Thanks for joining us. Tell me about becoming a CIA targeting officer. What does that mean, first of all? And where'd this Superbad come from? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I mean, what it means, it's interesting. When I applied to the CIA, it wasn't even, you couldn't even choose it as a job, right? So it became newer after, obviously, the 9/11 attacks. And really, it is just a grouping of people who help, like, find the bad guys so the operation side can go get them or hunt them down, or maybe even go and try to recruit them, right? It's very simple. I got into it, it was very simple. I was going to defend my grad thesis, and my grad thesis was on Kashmir. And so it was the night I was preparing, and I was like, heavens, I am never going to find a job with my focus being Kashmir. Like, where would I apply? So that night, I went online and I applied to the CIA. And maybe about 6 weeks later, they called me and I did my interview. So it went pretty quick. But yeah, it's
Wow.
really, you know, in college, you make weird decisions. And it's like, I never even considered it as a career.
That's so cool. All right, so it's good for people to know out there if you've applied to the CIA, give them at least 6 weeks maybe to get back to you. You're not going to get the call back the very next day. I feel like whenever I think about the CIA, I just did an interview for my Fox show with John Radcliffe, who's the CIA director. And one of the things I think a lot of people don't ever really consider, Sarah, is that for many folks who ultimately work for this agency, you really don't tell anybody, right? You really can't talk about what you do. And a lot of people who do these really incredible things all around the world to keep us safe here in the United States never get the credit for it because they can't ever talk about that. Some people are injured or unfortunately killed in the line of duty. That's something that I feel like I wish more people thought about. I now think about it having sat down with the CIA director, but maybe talk about that a little bit because I'm personally so grateful for everyone who does the job to keep our country safe, for what you've done in your job, for what these people who are spread out all across the world and are obviously they're covert, they can't talk about it, they're never going to hear about it, they're never going to tell anybody about what they've done. That's a pretty big deal, I think, that you're going out and you're doing things and maybe people will never know.
Well, yeah, it's funny. So I joined the CIA, and then a couple years later, I went undercover. So at that time, I lied to my family that I left the
Oh,
CIA.
wow.
So it's funny when Benghazi happened. My mom is an engineer, and so her brain never stopped. So Benghazi happens, the news starts talking about it, right? And they start talking about how the consulate only has like 5 or 6 people. Two showed up with the ambassador. So my mom calls me up and she's like, "Oh wait, you're still CIA because I know who you work with. I know you're working with more than 3 people." And so she was all mad that I had lied to her, right? But she figured it out because the news sold me out. So you do your best to obviously keep it a secret. But it is an interesting life, right? Because then you really do cool stuff. And when I was undercover, I couldn't tell people, right? I remember being at like a happy hour and someone was like putting my job down, but it wasn't my real job,
And you're
right? And I was
like,
just like,
dude, if you
oh,
only knew, if you only knew. Wow.
yeah. So you have to like not be much of a storyteller because you don't get to tell anyone your stories.
You have to be able to, and that's a hard thing for people to not take credit for things, to not want to have like the accolades that come with a job well done. Because so many of us, I mean, it feels great when people are like, "Hey, great job with that." But whenever you have to like downplay what you do, so I mean, kudos to everyone in the CIA who has these jobs, who and elsewhere, in our government, who is doing a job that they can never really talk about or get full credit for having done. You did an interview recently on the Sean Ryan show, and you talked about terrorists coming through the southern border. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the effectiveness of current border security measures in preventing such entries. Obviously, it's been a bit of a night and day change, I would say, Sarah, over the course of the past, I'm going to say 5 or 6 months, right?
Yeah, so it's a big change. Obviously, the southern border is pretty locked down. The one thing that we have to keep in mind is the terrorists weren't just using the southern border, they're using the northern border, which isn't locked
Right.
down, and then getting, as you know, legal immigration status. Obviously, our enemies want to embarrass us. They will embarrass us coming illegally, and they will also embarrass us coming legally. Just so you know, a few weeks ago, one of the terrorists slotted for the U.S. homeland attacks kind of like lost his cool in Germany before he got here and did a stabbing, is detained. But if you think about it, he was in Germany planning to come here, right? It's interesting to find out how is he planning to get here from Germany, because we have to figure out what the terrorists are doing now to circumvent us closing the border. But the other issue too is thousands came over the border. So we also
Right.
have to hunt them down now in our local communities and quickly, because it's very dangerous how many were allowed under the open border.
Yeah, I mean, you hear about the gotaways, right? The people who we know crossed over, we know actually came into this country, but they didn't go the formal route that a lot of people did, which was they went to Border Patrol, they were sort of processed in the country. They're given this court date, which, Sarah, it's absolutely ridiculous, like six
Mm-hmm.
years from now, right? Yeah, right. I think, there's a handful of them that ever show up to these court dates. But we're talking about the people who didn't want us to know they were here, the people who we know via, some of our intelligence or some of the security measures we have at the southern border actually crossed in. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they're from. We don't know what their intentions are here in this country. We just had this guy, obviously, out in Boulder who was an Egyptian national who overstayed his visa. That's a common way. I think a lot of those things
Mm-hmm.
happen. But we also have someone I know, I think last week, someone who was connected to Al Qaeda who was arrested as well. And this is
Mm-hmm.
the thing that I think a lot of people, I know I've thought about it over the course of the past 4 years, have been concerned about. For those of us who lived through 9/11, for those of us who remember the feeling on that day that we were attacked on our own soil here in the United States, I mean, I get chills even talking about it now. And I feel like we have this whole generation of Americans who are now kind of getting into the workforce who really were honestly too young to have any real
Mm-hmm.
memory of it. It was horrific. We never want to see that happen again. And I am personally terrified that there might be, and there probably are, people right now in this country who have come over our border, whether the northern border, the southern border, or as you're saying, maybe they came in some sort of a quote unquote legal route and they are potentially planning something here on U.S. soil that could be absolutely horrific, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, the bin Laden sons are planning another 9/11. It's very concerning. And they actually have been talking about, they move people over and weapons, fully automatic weapons, and suicide vests, the southern border. They moved them over near San Diego,
Oh,
near
wow.
Los Alamos, Texas, and through Nogales, in Arizona. So think about it. Al Qaeda had free reign, three border areas to move whatever they want. They moved suicide bombers, vests, weapons. And, our government is really not taking seriously this threat from the bin Ladens. And it's because the last administration ended all of our human intelligence in Afghanistan. Think about that. They are
Yeah,
not
that's
collecting on these people. It's scary.
so. Do you mean whenever we exited Afghanistan now that we just really have no idea what's going on over there?
Yeah, we abandoned our assets or we took some out, but we got rid of it. Was actually the head of CENTCOM who said we lost 98% of humans. So we're not just guessing that number. He said that in a congressional testimony.
So, if you were advising President Trump right now, would you tell him that you would like to see us at least in some way be able to get back into Afghanistan or engage in some way there to have some sense of what's going on? Because honestly, that is very scary, Sarah, to think about the Bin Laden family trying to plan something else here in the U.S. or elsewhere in the world. Quite frankly, is that what you would say, that we need to increase intelligence there?
Yeah, I mean, I would also focus on the threat to him. So I would tell him he's being lied to about Hamza bin Laden. He's alive and running Al Qaeda. But I also want him to know that Hamza bin Laden is helping the Iranian IRGC. They have a group called the Intelligence Organization. The US government usually focuses on the Quds Force, but the president's threats coming out of the IO. And actually, Al Qaeda is helping the IO on their plot against the president. As you can imagine, lots of times IRGC doesn't do recruitment well and their plots fall apart, like when they tried to do the Assad ambassador in DC. But now when you're leveraging Al Qaeda and the bin Ladens and the money behind them for a threat, it elevates it significantly.
As you know, our friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of your life. He didn't just stop by simply creating the best pillow. Mike created the best bed sheets ever. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike is offering the best deal on his Giza Dream bed sheets. Any size, any color, just $49.98. That's right, you can even get queens, kings, split kings, and California kings, any size, any color, just $49.98. Order now because when they're gone, they're gone. Also, for a limited time, when your order is over $100, you will receive $100 in free digital gifts. Call 1-800-624-3945, use promo code LARA, or go to mypillow.com and make sure you use the promo code LARA for the amazing offer of $49.98 on the Giza Dream Sheets, any size and any color. Number again is 1-800-624-3945. It's so scary to think about any of that. I also want to talk about China. China has been something that I think a lot of people in the United States have maybe been asleep at the wheel on. The CCP is no joke. I fully believe that they have been kind of waging a war on America for a long time that most of us have been completely unaware of, that we just go about our lives and we don't realize. But yet in the background, China has been doing so many different things to break down our society, to divide us, to pit us against one another, to dumb down our country, to just enrich themselves and make their country, men and women, better, and allow the opposite to happen here. I fully believe that. But you talked, I believe, also about the increase in Chinese nationals at the border. Tell me about that, because that is also something that's a little scary. We've seen these student visas revoked for a lot of people, especially a lot of students who have ties to the CCP. But tell me about the threat from China and why that's so scary in your eyes.
Yeah, the border, right? All of our enemies flooded it while they could. And so now we have a big problem inside. What people don't realize, that when you're in the West, you put a Western view on things. Well, in China, in their culture, your family units, right? And your family unit serves your government. So even if a one-off member of your family is in America, they still serve their parents or their grandparents or their siblings, and then who serve their government. So at the end of the day, when China calls on those people, they will serve their government, right? They don't aren't allied to us and support us. And then, like you said, even just we enable so much of this, right? For years, China not only has bought up our farmland, what people focus on, they bought up businesses, they control chambers of commerce. We have over 100,000 students and researchers in our universities. And what people forget is they also get government grants. So we have Department of Defense grants going to Chinese CCP students so they can steal our technologies, improve their capabilities, and unfortunately in the future use that against us. And that's a very scary thing, and we've been naive. I've seen a lot of people complain like, oh, we didn't compete well against China because we focused on terrorism. First, we didn't do terrorism as good as we should have, and stop making excuses, right? You didn't compete against China because you didn't have the right plan, you didn't have the right bodies working it, and now you're behind. So we really need to get ahead of that threat instead of just keep always being like, oh no, now they can do this, now they can do that. Oh, now they have this airship. Like, why are we learning these things after the fact?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It is something that I hope people are taking incredibly seriously. I know that's something that Director Radcliffe is also focused on is China very intently, because this is also, I believe, they're our biggest geopolitical foe. There's no doubt about it. They're working in the background against us all day, every day. They're, sending their students over here to learn in America. And then to your point, whenever they go back home to China, their allegiance is to the Chinese government. And they have no problem sharing any information that they learned here and using it to enrich China and make it stronger and better. And, you know, it's very detrimental, I think, to the United States. Let me ask you about overall, maybe something we haven't talked about that you think Americans should be aware of, or what you see as the biggest challenges facing U.S. intelligence agencies today. I know there's so much. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world. But what would you tell Americans that maybe they should be aware of?
You know, I think it's almost the same issue. It's the fact that our enemies are starting to come together, and our government doesn't view them that way. Obviously, we saw in Ukraine, Russia aligned with Iran, North Korea worked together, right? We're seeing with Al Qaeda's upcoming homeland plot, you know, it's Al Qaeda, it's Iran. They use Chinese fentanyl pipelines to move some of those supplies, like the suicide vest in, right? Well, how our government's organized, you have a person who looks at Iran, you have a person who looks at Russia, you have a person who looks at China, you have a person who looks at this terrorist group and then that terrorist group, when there's like probably 5 or 6 different terrorist groups supporting this. So we don't have a government structure focused on our enemies in the way they're working together. And that's a problem. Americans should understand things are falling between the gaps if you're not looking at those crossovers. Just Iran alone, you know, we're negotiating with them, right? Obviously on this nuclear deal, but nobody's paying attention to what other dealings they're having. You know, they're going into Afghanistan every 30 to 60 days, talking about very horrible things here, like obviously the plot against your father-in-law, but they're also helping the terrorists work on like a dirty bomb with uranium. Like there's a lot of things being ignored because we're missing these gaps in between.
It is. It's really insane stuff. Well, listen, we're grateful that there are people out there like you who are focusing on this, who are watching this. What do you make of the BRICS nations? I feel like over the past 4 years, we saw that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa coming together to, you know, it seems like that group together, it absolutely scares the hell out of me. I got to be honest, Sarah. You know, they had several meetings. They talked about coming up with their own currency. What do people need to know about that?
Yeah, it's a block to counter us. And, you know, we do focus on our near peer, right? Russia and China, but India is this really interesting player in the middle, right? Because it's like our ally and then it's Russia's ally. And they kind of have this power position nobody's paying attention to. So, yes, when they go into a block with a large number of people, some aren't always thinking of our best interests. It gives them, you know, a play on the board. And then in the future, who are they going to align with, right? When we have more problems with our near peer and our other enemies. So it is something we really need to keep in mind. I think a lot of it gets ignored because people are like, oh, they're coming together for business or economic interests. But a lot of it is security, government, military interests.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to keep our eye on everything. Before we let you go, I know you have a book, The Gathering Storm. Tell me about it and what your mission is with that.
Yeah, really, that came out of a Green Beret, Scott Mann. So me, him, a number of other, you know, former intel type of people have been warning the U.S. government about this plot we're seeing that I talked about in Afghanistan against the U.S. homeland. So we got to a point, it's like, okay, we informed who we can in the government. We're worried they're not going to thwart the attack. Like there is a duty to us to help prepare our families, our communities, and our state. So how do we do that? So Scott had this really good idea. He'd bring a bunch of experts together and put together this little manual. And really it's simple. It talks about the threat. It talks about the questions you should ask yourself and be able to answer in preparation. And then it has this really great section on lessons learned from prior attacks. So you can think those through your head. Like you said, a lot of the generation who are younger haven't even lived through 9/11, right? They haven't thought through these things. So it's really just to help everyday Americans prepare. And that's really under Scott's nonprofit. So all the money goes to help feed people who help collect the intel. And it's just tfpineapple.org if you want to get that.
Well, I think it's something, sadly, I hope, and I think we all hoped we never would have to deal with it again, but we had a bit of a vacuum in the Middle East over the past 4 years, right? We allowed the Afghanistan exit to happen. We allowed these terror cells that were all but kind of destroyed, Sarah, under Donald Trump's first term in office to come back together, to, revive themselves and regain a lot of power and a lot of strength. We allowed Iran to enrich itself over the past 4 years. That obviously, they have their proxies all over the Middle East. So it's terrifying stuff. And I hate that we have to think about it, but we have to think about it because we need to be prepared here. I can tell you President Trump is certainly focused on this and preventing another 9/11 style attack. But you know what? You can only do so much. And when we've let millions of people illegally cross our border, inevitably you're going to have some bad apples in that bunch. We've seen it. We talked about it here with you. So I hope everybody goes and gets Sarah's book. Tell everybody one more time where they can find it, Sarah.
Yeah, it's just TF, task force, pineapple.org. It's just a nonprofit who helps our veterans that have put it out. So, all proceeds go to help others.
Amazing. Well, Sarah Adams, you were great. Thanks for sharing some insights with us, giving us a little background. I think people love to be able to kind of peek behind the curtain and find out, what it is we feel like we know, but maybe we aren't sure about. Thanks for filling us in on it today, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, to everybody at home, as always, make sure you like, subscribe, share, and follow, and we'll see you back here next time for more of The Right View. And I won't back down.